The morning was crisp and still, the kind of silence that only wide stretches of prairie could hold. Daniel McGrath walked the familiar path along his fence line, boots crunching the frost-bitten earth. He carried his rifle slung over one shoulder, though he rarely needed it these days. What concerned him more were the coyoteous, slick, clever thieves who'd made a habit of helping themselves to his chickens. That was why he'd set the traps. Not for sport, but for necessity. Living alone on a ranch meant every scrap of food mattered. Daniel had learned to protect what was his with careful hands and steady judgment. He rounded a bend near the cottonwoods, expecting to find perhaps a caught rabbit or, with luck, a snarling coyote. But what he saw stopped him cold. In the iron jaws of the trap was not an animal at all, but a girl. She was young, no older than 16 or 17, her long black hair tangled and wild, her dark eyes flashing with pain and fury. She had fallen when the trap clamped shut on her ankle, and though she tried to rise, the chain held her fast. Her breath came ragged, her hands scraped with dirt as she pulled against the steel. When she saw him, her body went rigid. Her lips drew back in a snarl of fear, though her trembling betrayed her exhaustion. Daniel froze where he stood. Good Lord, he muttered under his breath. This wasn't what he'd meant to catch at all. The girl's voice rang sharp, though broken, by pain. Don't touch me, I'll fight. She grabbed for a stone near her hand, clutching it like a weapon. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath wheezing against the cold. Daniel lifted his hands slowly, palms open, showing he meant no harm. Easy now, he said, his voice low, steady. I ain't gonna hurt you. You've been caught, but I'll get you free. Her eyes narrowed, mistrust flashing like lightning. He knew that look well, like a cornered doe, ready to strike or bolt if given the chance. Liar, she spat, clutching the rock tighter. Men always lie. The words stung him more than he expected. Daniel was a man of few words, but never a liar. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, until he was close enough to see the angry red of her ankle caught between the iron jaws. Blood stained the leather of her moccasin. You're hurt bad, he said gently. If you fight me, it'll only get worse. Her hands trembled, the stones shaking in her grip. For a moment, Daniel thought she might try to strike him anyway, but pain clouded her defiance. He could see it in the way her lips tightened against a cry, in the way her fingers twitched with exhaustion. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small flask. Here, he offered, setting it on the ground and pushing it toward her. Water, you don't have to take it, but it's yours if you want it. The girl stared, suspicion etched deep in her face. At last, she snatched the flask, uncorked it, and drank greedily. The water dribbled down her chin, but she didn't stop until it was nearly empty. When she lowered it, her breathing eased, though her grip on the stone remained tight. Daniel gave her space, then leaned closer to the trap. I'm gonna open this. It'll hurt a moment, but then you'll be free. No, she cried, panic surging again. You'll drag me to soldiers. They'll kill me. Her words revealed more than she meant, and Daniel's chest tightened. He'd heard stories of Apache camps burned, of families scattered, of captives hauled off like trophies. He shook his head firmly. I'm not talking you to soldiers. I'm talking you out of this trap. That's all. With slow, careful hands, Daniel pried the iron jaws apart. The mechanism groaned, fighting him, but at last it released. The girl gasped as the pressure on her ankle eased. She tried to pull back, but her leg buckled beneath her, too weak to stand. Daniel caught her before she fell, his arms steady as stone. She stiffened at his touch, thrashing weakly, but his grip was gentle. Easy, he murmured. You're safe, now safe. The word rang foreign in her ears. She didn't believe it, not yet, but for the first time since she'd been snared, she wasn't fighting the steel. She was simply breathing, trembling, staring up at the man who had set her free instead of claiming her as spoil. And for Daniel, something shifted. He had lived in silence for years, the weight of solitude pressing heavy on his ranch. Yet here, in the wild eyes of a frightened girl, he felt something stir. Responsibility. Perhaps for the faintest spark of connection. What began as an accident was already becoming something more. Daniel eased the trap shut and tossed it aside, as though disgusted with his own handiwork. He hadn't meant for this. His traps were meant for vermin, not people. But the damage was done, and the girl sat before him, ankle swollen and bloody, her breath ragged with fear. She tried to stand again, wobbling on one good leg, but the injury made her stumble. The rock slipped from her hand and landed uselessly. In the dirt, she froze, wide-eyed, as if waiting for him to strike. Now that she was defenseless, Daniel bent to retrieve the rock. But instead of keeping it, he placed it gently back in her palm. If it makes you feel safer, hold on to it, he said softly. The girl blinked in surprise. She had expected cruelty, a blow, maybe chains. Not this. I don't want your thanks, Daniel continued, his voice as calm as the slow wind in the cottonwoods. But I won't see you hobble off and bleed to death. Neither. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Why? She asked. The single word trembled with suspicion. Daniel scratched at his beard, struggling to answer. 'Cause it's right. That's reason enough. He dug into his satchel again, pulling free a strip of cloth he used for cleaning tools. It wasn't much, but it would serve. He crouched near her, making sure to move slowly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her ankle. She hesitated, gripping the rock tight, but finally gave a curt nod. Daniel worked carefully, cleaning the wound with water from his flask, then wrapping the cloth snug around her ankle. She winced, but didn't cry out. Her gaze stayed locked on him, wary but curious, as though trying to read the truth in his face. "You've done this before," she said at last, her voice quieter now. "My wife." Daniel paused, the word catching. "She hurt her leg once. Years back, I learned then how to set things right." The mention of his wife brought a shadow over him, and he quickly cleared his throat, tying off the bandage. "There won't heal fast, but it'll keep you walking." The girl shifted uncomfortably, testing the wrap. It held firm. She narrowed her eyes. "You could have left me. Why didn't you?" Daniel leaned back on his heels. The question dug at him. Same as before. He answered plain, "Because I ain't a man who walks away from someone hurting." For a long moment, the two stared at one another. The silence stretched, heavy but not unfriendly. Then, almost reluctantly, she asked, "What will you do with me now?" Daniel stood and offered his hand, though he didn't expect her to take it. "Nothin', you're free to go when you can walk. But the storm's rolling in, and you won't get far before it hits." He tilted his head toward the gray clouds gathering on the horizon. "My cabin's near, I've got food, fire, and a roof. You can stay a spell till you're strong enough to travel." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Stay with you. I'm offering shelter, not chains," he said firmly. "You'll have my word, no harm will come to you under my roof." The girl looked at him as though weighing every syllable. Her people had taught her not to trust white men, for trust often meant betrayal. And yet, here stood this quiet rancher, not forcing, not threatening, just waiting with an open hand. At last, she shifted, gripping his arm to pull herself up. Pain flared across her face, but she swallowed it down, standing on her good leg. "My name is Nita," she said, almost like a challenge. Daniel nodded. "Daniel," he replied simply, and with that, the fragile thread of trust was spun between them. It was thin, delicate as spider silk, but it was there. Together they started the slow walk back to his cabin, the storm clouds gathering behind them. They knew what lay ahead, whether mistrust would harden again, or something else might grow in its place. But for now, Daniel had made his choice. He would not turn away. He would help her. And Nita, though her heart still burned with fear, began to wonder if this man was unlike the others she had known. By the time they reached Daniel's cabin, the storm had broken loose. Rain drummed on the roof, wind howled through the trees, and the plains beyond blurred into a gray curtain of water. The cabin was small, built for one man, but its walls were strong, and the fire Daniel coaxed to life soon filled the space with warmth. Nita sat stiffly near the hearth, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders, her bandaged ankle stretched toward the flames. Daniel kept his distance, moving about the cabin quietly, laying out blankets to dry, stoking the fire, setting a pot of beans on to cook. He spoke little, knowing words could spook her as surely as sudden movement. At last, when the rain eased to a steady patter, Daniel pulled a chair near but not too close. "You hungry?" he asked gently. Nita's dark eyes flicked to the simmering pot. Her pride warred with her stomach, but the hollow in her cheeks betrayed her. She gave a small nod. Daniel ladled beans into a tin bowl and slid it across the table toward her. She eyed it warily, then took the spoon, eating in guarded silence. The clink of metal was the only sound for a while. After a time, Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "How long you been out there alone?" Nita stiffened, spoon hovering. "Why do you want to know?" "Because it matters," he said plainly. "You were near starved when I found you, and a girl don't end up caught in a coyote trap unless she's desperate." Her jaw tightened. She set the spoon down slowly, her eyes glimmering with something between anger and sorrow. "You think I am weak?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I think you've been through hell, and somehow you're still staying in. That ain't weakness. That's strength." The fire popped. Nita stared into the flames, her lips pressed tight. Finally she spoke, her voice low, almost swallowed by the storm outside. "They came at dawn. Soldiers." Her fingers curled into fists on her knees. "We woke to the sound of guns, of horses, of men shouting. My mother pulled me to run, but there was fire, smoke, too many." Her breath hitched, but she forced herself on. "I saw my father fall. I saw my little brother." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as if holding. The memory in Daniel's chest tightened. He bowed his head, giving her space, letting her speak at her own pace. "They took some alive," she whispered. "I don't know where. I ran and ran. I thought maybe I would find the others. But the land is wide, and She shook her head, frustration burning in her eyes. "I was alone. Always alone. Until your trap." She spat the word, like venom, glaring at him. Daniel met her gaze steadily, shame shadowing his features. "That trap wasn't meant for you. But I'm sorry, just the same." Her breath shuddered, but she looked away. arms wrapping around herself as though to keep from shattering. "I thought you would drag me to them," she muttered. "The soldiers. Men always want to trade or sell us. Or, worse." Daniel's voice was rough when he answered. "I ain't those men, Nita. I don't give a damn what the soldiers want. You've been through enough." She studied him, her eyes sharp, searching for cracks in his words. What she saw there made her pause. His face carried lines of grief. His eyes, the weight of someone who knew loss. He wasn't speaking to win her trust. He was speaking truth. "Why are you alone?" she asked suddenly. Daniel's mouth tightened. He glanced at the fire, then back to her. "My wife's gone. Been near 5 years now. Fiva took her, left me with this ranch and a house too quiet for one man." The silence that followed was softer this time, not empty but shared. Nita lowered her eyes. "Then maybe we are the same," she whispered. "Both left behind." Daniel felt something stir in his chest at those words. A kinship unexpected. He nodded slowly. Maybe so. The storm outside rumbled on, but inside the cabin, a fragile bridge had begun to form two wounded souls, each carrying loss, each wary of the world, beginning to glimpse in the other a reflection of their own pain. And though mistrust still lingered in Nita's eyes, it was no longer the only thing there. The storm raged outside, rain lashing the roof in sheets, wind rattling the cabin's wooden walls. The wide plains were now a blur of gray, trees bending under the gusts, and the creek nearby swelled, churning with mud and debris. Inside, Daniel moved with quiet purpose, attending to the small fire that kept them warm. Nita sat on the edge of the bedroll he had spread near the hearth, her knees pulled close to her chest, her dark eyes fixed on the window as if she could will the storm away. Her bandaged ankle throbbed with pain, but more than that, a deeper unease made her tense. She was not used to being confined, to being safe. Safety felt like a trap. Daniel noticed her restlessness but didn't rush her. He carried water in a tin cup and poured it into another, sliding it across the floor, toward her. "Drink," he said softly. "Keeps you warm and helps the leg." She stared at him, suspicion in every line of her body. Then, as if realizing she had little choice, she took the cup with shaking hands. The warmth of the water seeped into her fingers, and, slowly, she sipped, closing her eyes briefly, as if tasting a strange comfort. Daniel crouched nearby, working quietly on the fireplace tools. Sparks from the fire reflected in his eyes as he glanced at her. "You can rest here as long as you need. I won't make you leave." The words hung in the air, but Nita didn't respond immediately. Years of running, hiding, and fear had taught her that promises from strangers often carried hidden danger. Yet the honesty in Daniel's voice was different from any man she had known. No threat lingered, no expectation. Just an offer. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain pounded like drumbeat, water streaming from the eaves in torrents. Nita flinched at each clap of thunder, her body coiled, ready to bolt if the door opened. Daniel noticed, and for the first time, he spoke of something personal, almost as a shield against her fear. "Storms like this used to scare my wife," he admitted, glancing at her from the corner of his eyes. "She'd wake in the night, shaking. I'd sit with her till the thunder passed. Didn't matter how tired I was." Nita's eyes flicked to him, curious despite herself. His voice was steady, calm, and there was a quiet vulnerability to it. She had seen little of that in men especially, not ones she had feared. He finally rose and moved to fetch a blanket, returning to drape it over her shoulders. "You're wet. Won't get warm if you stay like that." She stiffened, surprised by the gesture. No one had cared for her like this in a long time, if ever. "Why?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Daniel met her gaze, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a plain truth. "Because it's right. You're hurt, you're alone, and you need help. That's reason enough." Nita's hands clutched the blanket, unsure whether to pull it tighter or shove it away. Finally, she let it settle, the warmth seeping into her aching body. She couldn't understand fully why he helped her, yet part of her recognized that the act alone, Disimpo, patient care, was not something to fight against. The hours stretched, and the storm showed no sign of relenting. Daniel busied himself with chores, making sure the cabin was secure, that the fire stayed bright, that food simmered steadily in the pot. He didn't hover, didn't press questions, he simply existed in a steady presence, letting her see that danger wasn't immediate. Here. By evening, the storm had weakened to a persistent drizzle. Nita, finally moving with a little more ease, carried herself toward the fire. She felt the ache in her ankle, but she also felt a small shift within, a seed of trust, fragile yet undeniable. "Do you always help people like this?" she asked cautiously, sitting on the edge of the hearth. Daniel shook his head, chuckling softly. "Not always, only when I think it's right. Not many would have done what I just did." Her dark eyes studied him, searching for deception, for any hint of duplicity. Finding none, she tilted her head, the first real hint of curiosity breaking through her wariness. That night, as they settled near the fire, the girl on the blankets, the rancher in his chair by the door, they shared the warmth in silence. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin, a fragile peace began to take root. Nita's fear did not vanish entirely, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a measure of safety and, perhaps, the faintest possibility of trust. For Daniel, the quiet companionship stirred something long dormant, the understanding that his life, so solitary for years, was opening to the unexpected. A girl, stranded by fate, had stumbled into his world, and perhaps, just perhaps, his world was about to change. Days passed, and the storm that had driven Nita into Daniel's cabin gradually gave way to clear skies. The prairie glistened under the morning sun, dew sparkling on the tall grasses, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the scent of wood smoke from the cabin. Life outside resumed its quiet rhythm, but inside, something new was beginning to grow. A cautious partnership. Nita's ankle had healed enough for her to walk with relative ease, though Daniel insisted she take care, leaning on him if needed. In return, she began to help around the ranch, her movements precise and graceful, each action carrying the knowledge of someone raised to survive. She tended the chickens, fed the animals, and swept the barn, showing a diligence that impressed Daniel. "You move like the wind through these hills," he commented one morning as she lifted a heavy bale of hay with ease. She gave him a faint, mischievous smile. "Wind is fast, must be careful." Daniel chuckled, watching her. There was an elegance in her work, a combination of strength and awareness that he admired. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, even after everything she had endured. In return, Daniel began teaching her about his world, showing her the ways of ranch life that were foreign to her. He taught her how to saddle a horse, how to mend fences, and how to handle the rifle with steady hands. Nita proved to be a quick learner, absorbing his instructions with keen focus. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree, Daniel stopped to admire her work. "You've got a good eye for this," he said. Nita shrugged. Apache children learn must look, must notice, otherwise, not survive. Curiosity sparked between them. Daniel began asking about her people, her culture, her life before the tragedy that left her alone. At first, she was reluctant, offering only fragments of stories, hesitant to share too much. But as days passed, trust began to build. She spoke of her village, the teachings of her parents, the songs sung around evening fires, and the lessons learned from the elders about the land, the animals, and the stars. In return, Daniel shared the history of his family and the ranch, the loss of his wife, and the lonely years that had followed. He showed her the fields he tended, the creek where he fished, and the wildflowers that dotted the hills. Each story, each demonstration, was a small bridge between their worlds. One day, Nita took Daniel out to a grove of wild herbs. She showed him which plants could soothe burns and cuts, which could be brewed into teas for strength, and which were dangerous to touch. "Land has lessons," she said. "Listen, watch. It tells you what it needs, what it gives." Daniel followed her instructions carefully, amazed at how much he had overlooked in his years of solitary work. He realized that her knowledge could make the ranch stronger, safer, more abundant. Yet more than that, he was struck by her patience and attention to detail, qualities that reminded him of the wife he had lost. Long ago, evenings became quieter, filled with small rituals. Nita would teach Daniel to craft simple tools from wood and stone, and he would show her how to cook over the fire, bake bread, and mend clothes. Slowly, shared tasks turned into shared laughter. The cabin, once silent except for the wind, now rang with the warmth of companionship. Despite the progress, both remained cautious. Nita's fear of betrayal lingered, a shadow that she sometimes wrestled with when Daniel wasn't looking. Daniel too knew that trust had to be earned, not demanded. But with each passing day, each shared task, and each lesson learned, they began to recognize something deeper: mutual respect, the spark of understanding, and the quiet beginnings of something that could grow into trust, and perhaps even something more. By the end of the week, the cabin no longer felt like a place of refuge for Nita alone. It was a shared space. Together, they had begun weaving their lives into a rhythm neither had expected. The prairie outside stretched vast and open, but inside the cabin, a new sense of home was taking root. And as Daniel watched Nita move about the ranch with confident ease, he understood that life, even after tragedy, could offer a chance to learn, to grow, and to heal together. The prairie was quiet that morning, the wind stirring the tall grass into a gentle wave, birds calling from the distant trees. Daniel and Nita worked side by side, repairing a section of fence damaged by the recent storm. Their movements were synchronized, unspoken understanding growing between them. Yet the peace of the ranch was fragile. News traveled fast in these parts, and not always kindly. A neighbor riding past the edge of Daniel's property had noticed a young Apache girl helping around the ranch. Whispers began to circulate through the small cluster of homesteads in the valley. "Did you hear? McGraw's harboring one of those Indians," one neighbor exclaimed over the fence while tending his horses. "She's living there with him." "Dangerous," said another, shaking his head. "You know what soldiers do when they find stray Apache?" Word reached the town, where gossip spread like wildfire. Soldiers and lawmen, always keen to maintain order, soon began making inquiries. They asked questions casually at first, friendly but probing. Then their visits became more pointed, their tone sharper. Back at the ranch, Daniel sensed the tension before it arrived. Nita, too, felt it in the air the way the crows scattered noisily from the trees. The nervous behavior of the horses, the distant sound of hoofbeats that seemed closer than they should be. One afternoon, a small patrol of soldiers rode up, stopping at the edge of the property. The leader, a stern-faced man with a scar across his cheek, dismounted. "McGrath," he called, voice loud enough to carry over the fields. "We hear you've taken in an Apache girl. Who is she? Where is she from?" Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, steady as stone. "Her name's Nita. She wandered into a trap meant for coyotes. She's hurt. That's all you need to know." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "You know the law. We can't allow this. Indians are under strict supervision. She should be in a camp, not living with the rancher." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fingers brushing the rifle leaning nearby. "She's not yours. She's not anyone's. She's free, and she's on my land, under my protection. I won't hand her over." The soldier took a step closer, hand hovering near his revolver. "Think carefully, McGrath. Defying orders has consequences." Nita watched from the cabin doorway, heart pounding, her first instinct to flee returning in full force. Fear gripped her like cold iron. She imagined being dragged away, forced into captivity, or worse. She swallowed, shaking her head. "I trusted him, but will he save me now?" Daniel noticed her fear and moved closer, his voice calm but firm. "Nita, stay behind me. I'll handle this." The standoff lasted several tense minutes. The soldiers argued, trying to intimidate Daniel with threats and legal jargon, but he remained resolute, his voice unwavering. "I said she stays. If you want to take her by force, you'll have to go through me." Nita's eyes widened. She had never imagined a white man could stand so firmly for her, against the law, against danger. Her fear began to shift, blending with a fragile thread of trust. After what seemed an eternity, the soldiers, frustrated and wary of confrontation, withdrew. The patrol left with warnings, but they did not take Nita. The threat lingered, but Daniel's actions spoke volumes. He would not betray her. Once the soldiers were gone, Nita slumped to the ground, tears of relief forming in her eyes. Daniel knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. "I won't let them take you." Her voice trembled. "Why? Why do you care?" Daniel gave a small wry smile, though his eyes were serious. "Because it's right. And because you're not alone anymore." The ranch, once a quiet haven for a solitary man, had now become a place of risk and defiance. But more than that, it had become a sanctuary, a home where trust, once fragile, had begun to root. Nita began to understand that courage was not just in running or hiding, it could be in standing firm, even in the face of overwhelming odds. By nightfall, the prairie was calm again, the storm of gossip and soldiers passing like a fleeting shadow. Daniel and Nita sat together near the fire, the silence heavy but comfortable. Both knew that dangers were not over, that whispers of trouble would return. Yet, in the warmth of the cabin and the quiet understanding between them, they had discovered the first glimmer of something stronger than fear: solidarity, trust, and the quiet promise that they would face whatever came together. The prairie glowed in the early morning light, dew clinging to the tips of the grass like tiny jewels. Daniel and Nita moved about the ranch, completing morning chores with a rhythm that had become familiar over the past weeks. The horses were fed, the fences repaired, and the smoke from the cabin chimney curled lazily into the crisp air. Yet beneath the calm, Nita's heart thumped with a rhythm she couldn't ignore. She had thought the danger from the soldiers and neighbors had passed, but old memories, sharp and unforgiving, began to claw their way back into her mind. She stopped mid-step, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The dust of approaching riders stirred her instinctive fear. The memories came: unbidden soldiers shouting, fires burning, the panic of being separated from her people. Her body stiffened, breath catching in her throat. Daniel noticed her hesitation. "What is it?" he asked gently, approaching her. Nita shook her head, eyes wide. I can't stay. Not if they find me, not if they come for me again." Daniel frowned, sensing the depth of her terror. "Nita, listen, I won't let anyone take you. You're safe here. You have to believe that." She backed away instinctively, stumbling slightly on her still healing ankle. "You don't understand. I've been hunted before. People pretend to care, but then they take you. I can't trust that it won't happen again." Her voice trembled, and Daniel's chest tightened. He had known fear before, solitude, and the weight of loss, but he could see that this fear was older, deeper. It was survival, ingrained from childhood, hardened by tragedy. He knelt to her level, speaking slowly, carefully. "Nita, you trusted me enough to stay here through the storm. You trusted me enough to let me help your ankle, to feed you, to keep you safe when others wanted to hurt you. I'm not them. I don't want to take anything from you. You're free to go, but you don't have to." Her hands clutched the hem of her tunic, fingers curling into the fabric. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "But what if you change your mind? What if you grow tired of me and hand me over? Daniel shook his head firmly. I won't. You need to understand something. Protecting you isn't a favor. It's right, and it's my choice, not theirs, not yours. I'm not going to abandon you. Not now, not ever. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit, any flicker of doubt. But he met her gaze evenly, unflinching, his eyes holding steady reassurance. It was the first time she truly saw the honesty in a man who could have been like the others. Her breathing slowed slightly, though the tension in her shoulders remained. I've never had someone care like this, she admitted softly. Not anyone, not ever. I thought I'd always be alone, always running, always hiding. Daniel reached out, hesitating only briefly before letting his hand brush hers. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly. You don't have to run, not here, not with me. The touch was simple, yet it carried a weight that settled over her like the warmth of a fire on a cold night. Her fear still lingered, like shadows at the edge of a room, but the shadows were less frightening now. For a long moment, they stood silently, the morning sun casting long golden stripes across the prairie. Nita's dark eyes softened, reflecting something more than fear. Interest, tentative and fragile, beginning to take root. I'll try, she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. I'll try to stay, if you promise, if you really mean it. Daniel nodded, his hand still over hers. I promise. No one will harm you while I'm here. You have my word. She took a deep, shaky breath and nodded, allowing herself to lean slightly toward him, not for protection, but in acknowledgement that for the first time in her life, someone had given her a choice, and that choice was safe. The return of fear had tested them both, revealing the fragility of trust, the scars of the past, and the courage it took to open one's heart. And yet, when fear ebbed, what remained was stronger, a bond forged not by circumstance, but by deliberate care and steadfast protection. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and golden, the wind whispering through the grass. Inside, Nita felt a flicker of hope, a promise that she might finally belong. Not because she had no other option, but because she had chosen to stay. The tension on the ranch was thick that afternoon, like the oppressive heat before a summer storm. Daniel had been working in the barn when he noticed the distant dust clouds forming on the horizon. Riders more than a few were making their way across the plains, moving with purpose. His stomach tightened. He knew who they were, a patrol of soldiers, returning, likely tipped off by the persistent gossip in town. Nita, sitting near the cabin doorway, froze at the sight. Her past came rushing back, the shouting men, the chaos, the fire, the fear of being taken. Her instinct was to run, to vanish into the open plains where she might blend into the wild grass. Don't move, Daniel said softly, stepping in front of her. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that demanded attention. He had no weapon raised yet, but his stance was firm, unyielding. Daniel, they'll take me, she whispered, panic threading through her voice. You can't stop them all. They'll find me. And I'll stop them, he interrupted, his tone unwavering. I told you before, I won't hand you over. Not today, not ever. The riders came closer, their horses' hooves drumming a relentless rhythm across the prairie. The soldiers, stern-faced and armed, rode up to the cabin, dismounting as they reached the fence line. The leader, a man with a cruel set to his jaw, stepped forward. McGrath, he called, voice sharp as a whip. We've been told you harbor an Apache girl. You know the law. Hand her over immediately, or you'll face consequences. Daniel met his gaze evenly, his jaw tight. I know the law, and I know right from wrong. She's not yours. She's not anyone's but herself. I won't hand her over. The soldier stepped closer, fingers brushing the hilt of his revolver. You'll regret this. Defying orders isn't taken lightly. Nita's chest heaved with fear. Her legs trembled, and she clutched Daniel's arm for support. Please, don't let them. Daniel placed a firm hand on her shoulder, steadying her. I told you, Nita, I'm not letting anyone hurt you. Stand back, stay quiet, and trust me. The tension stretched, each moment thick with the potential for violence. The soldiers, realizing Daniel's resolve, tried to intimidate him with legal threats and the presence of their numbers, but Daniel did not waver. He didn't draw a weapon, yet his power lay in his steadfastness, in the calm confidence of a man willing to risk himself for another. Finally, the soldier leader frowned, realizing Daniel would not be moved. This isn't over, he said, spitting to the side. But for now, leave the girl here, we'll be back. With that, the patrol remounted, leaving dust clouds and uneasy silence in their wake. Nita slumped, the tension in her body releasing in a shuddering sigh. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Relief mingled with lingering fear. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. See, I meant what I said. You're safe. No one will take you while I'm here. Her hands trembled as she reached for his, gripping it tightly. I thought, she began, voice wavering. I thought all men, all people would betray me. I didn't think anyone could stand like this. For me, Daniel's voice was quiet, yet unwavering. You don't have to think it. You have to see it, and now you do. In that moment, Nita realized that safety was more than walls, and Loxit was the unflinching courage of someone who refused to betray her. Daniel's stand had not only kept her from harm, but it had proven the sincerity of his care. As the dust settled and the patrol disappeared beyond the hills, the quiet of the prairie returned. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the faint promise of peace. Nita, sitting close to the fire inside the cabin, felt a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time, she understood that she could rely on someone truly without reservation. Daniel, meanwhile, felt the shift in himself as well. The solitary rancher who had lived years in quiet isolation now knew that courage and trust could forge bonds stronger than fear. They had faced the threat together, and in doing so, their connection deepened, unspoken but undeniable. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the plains. Inside the cabin, Nita leaned against Daniel, her heart still beating fast but no longer with panic. They had faced danger and together. They had survived, and in that survival lay the seed of something new: trust, hope, and the fragile beginnings of love. The tension on the ranch was thick that afternoon, like the oppressive heat before a summer storm. Daniel had been working in the barn when he noticed the distant dust clouds forming on the horizon. Riders more than a few were making their way across the plains, moving with purpose. His stomach tightened. He knew who they were: a patrol of soldiers, returning, likely tipped off by the persistent gossip in town. Nita, sitting near the cabin doorway, froze at the sight. Her past came rushing back: the shouting men, the chaos, the fire, the fear of being taken. Her instinct was to run, to vanish into the open plains where she might blend into the wild grass. "Don't move," Daniel said softly, stepping in front of her. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that demanded attention. He had no weapon raised yet, but his stance was firm, unyielding. "Daniel, they'll take me," she whispered, panic threading through her voice. "You can't stop them. They'll find me, and I'll stop them." He interrupted, his tone unwavering. "I told you before, I won't hand you over. Not today, not ever." The morning sun stretched across the prairie, painting the fields in golden light. After the tension of the soldiers' visit and the threat they had posed, the ranch seemed almost peaceful again. The air smelled of fresh hay, damp earth, and the faint smoke from the cabin hearth. For the first time in weeks, Nita allowed herself to move freely, without the constant edge of fear she had carried. Daniel had begun his day with routine chores, tending the animals and checking the fences. But now he paused to watch Nita work in the barnyard. She moved with a grace that was both practical and elegant, her hands sure and confident as she fed the horses and checked the chickens. Her eyes, once wary and constantly scanning for threats, now held a quiet focus, occasionally flicking to Daniel with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You're good with the animals," Daniel remarked, leaning against the fence. Nita glanced at him, a spark of amusement in her eyes. "Animals understand fear. They understand care. People, sometimes not so much." Daniel chuckled. "You've learned to read them, just like you read the land." "I'm impressed." She shrugged, a small blush coloring her cheeks. "I must survive, you said. Observe, act, survive." Daniel nodded, understanding the depth of what she meant. Every movement, every gesture, every careful decision had been shaped by years of survival. And yet, here she was, standing before him, not just surviving, but beginning to thrive. As the day wore on, their interactions grew more natural. Nita helped Daniel with chores, learning the routines of ranch life, while Daniel continued to teach her skills that were foreign to her: how to mend fences, tend crops, and cook over the fire. But beyond the work, a deeper connection was forming. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, Daniel guided Nita to a small grove near the cabin. "I thought you might like to see this," he said, pointing to a patch of wildflowers and herbs. "Some of these you can use for medicine, some just for beauty. I think you'll like it." Nita knelt among the flowers, running her fingers over the petals and leaves. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Even after pain, even after loss, land gives." Daniel watched her, the sunlight catching the gold in her dark hair, and felt a surge of protectiveness and admiration. "Just like people," he said softly. "Even after hardship, even after betrayal, some can still give kindness. You've done that, Nita. You've given me trust." Little by little, she looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his, something unspoken passing between them. The bond they had forged was not sudden. It had grown through shared trials, quiet moments, and mutual respect. The trust that had once seemed impossible was now tangible, like the warmth of the fire between them. That evening, as the prairie cooled under the purple dusk, they sat together on the cabin porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Nita rested her head on her hands, elbows on her knees, glancing at Daniel. "I never thought I could feel safe," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not like this. Not with anyone." Daniel reached over, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You're safe. You always will be." His tone carried the weight of promise, of unwavering commitment. Nita's lips curved slightly. the first true, unguarded smile he had seen in her. I want to stay, she said quietly. I want to help, to learn, to be here. Daniel nodded, his chest swelling with a mix of relief and quiet joy. Then stay. You're welcome here, Nita, not as a guest, not as a ward, but as part of this life, part of this home. The bond forged between them was no longer just about survival, it had become about choice, about connection, about shared hope. Both had been shaped by loss and fear, but together they were creating something new, a life built on trust, respect, and the quiet beginnings of love. As night fell, stars blanketing the sky, they moved inside the cabin, tending the fire, and preparing a simple meal. The past remained, its shadows lingering at the edges of their minds, but for the first time, the present felt safe, warm, and full of possibility. Outside, the prairie was silent and vast, yet inside, Daniel and Nita had found a world of their own, a world where fear had been met with courage, and where a bond forged through hardship promised something enduring, something beautiful, something real. The prairie was quiet at dawn, a soft gold spilling over the horizon, painting the hills in warm hues. After weeks of trials, danger, and tentative trust, the ranch now seemed like a sanctuary, a place where Daniel and Nita could finally breathe together, without the constant shadow of fear. Nita moved through the cabin with ease, her ankle fully healed, tending the morning fire and preparing breakfast. She hummed softly, a song from her childhood, one her mother used to sing while working the fields. Daniel, leaning against the doorway, watched her with a mixture of admiration and quiet affection. The girl who had once trembled at the sight of men now carried herself with confidence and grace, a survivor, molded by hardship but softened by care. Smells good, Daniel said, his voice breaking the quiet. Nita looked up, a smile tugging at her lips. I learned from the best, and some from my people. She gestured to the small patch of herbs and wild vegetables growing near the cabin. Land teaches, you just have to listen. Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand over hers as she stirred the pot. And people can teach, too, he said softly. Like you've taught me patience, care, trust. Her eyes widened slightly, a blush creeping across her cheeks. I didn't think I could trust anyone again. Not after everything. But you did, Daniel said, squeezing her hand gently. And that's what matters. They ate together, in companionable silence, the meal simple but satisfying. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the distant calls of birds and the faint rustle of cattle moving in the pasture. It was a normal day, ordinary in its rhythm, yet it felt extraordinary to both of them, a life they had carved out of uncertainty and fear, built on shared courage and slowly blossoming affection. After breakfast, Daniel led Nita outside to the edge of the prairie where the horizon stretched endlessly. I want you to see something, he said, his tone gentle but firm. Nita followed, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. They reached a small grove, sunlight filtering through the leaves, illuminating wildflowers in vivid colors. Daniel pointed to the earth around them. I planted these after the storm, he explained, to remind us that life can grow again, even after destruction. Nita knelt among the flowers, running her fingers along the petals. Beautiful, she whispered, echoing her earlier words from when she first arrived at the ranch. But this time, there was no fear in her voice, only awe and a deepening sense of belonging. Daniel knelt beside her, looking out at the vast prairie. We've both been through a lot, he said, but now we have a choice, to keep surviving alone or to build something together. A life we choose, not one forced upon us. Nita turned to him, eyes glistening with emotion. I want to build it with you, she said quietly, the weight of her words carrying the full truth of her heart. Daniel smiled, a warmth spreading across his face. Then we will, he said simply, together. From that moment on, their days were filled with shared labor and quiet companionship. Nita taught Daniel about the land, the herbs, and the ways of the wild, while Daniel shared the rhythms of ranch life, guiding her in tasks she had never imagined doing. They laughed together, planned together, and found solace in the presence of each other. Neighbors who had once whispered about Nita's presence slowly came to understand that she was not a captive or a stranger, but a part of the ranch, part of Daniel's life. The prairie, which had once been a place of isolation and fear, became a home full of warmth, trust, and possibility. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Daniel and Nita stood side by side on the porch, watching the horizon. We've come a long way, Daniel said quietly. Nita leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. And we've survived, she whispered. Daniel tightened his arm around her. Not just survived, he said. We've found something worth living for, something worth protecting. Together, the prairie stretched endlessly before them, vast and open, but in the small cabin and the life they shared, they had found safety, trust, and the beginnings of love. A new chapter had begun, not just for the ranch, not just for the prairie, but for the two of them, together. And as night fell, stars glittering across the sky, the quiet ranch echoed with the promise of tomorrow, a future they had chosen, built not on fear or survival, but on companionship, trust, and the unwavering bond that had been forged through trials, courage, and shared humanity. For Daniel and Nita, the past was behind them, the present filled with warmth, and the future vast open and full of possibilities.